This soft gel contains 200 milligrams of ibuprofen. And this one does too, even though it's 7 millimeters shorter and almost 300 milligrams lighter. How do they fit the same amount of ibuprofen, which barely dissolves in water, into this easier-to-swallow mini gel? I checked the most obvious thing first. I cut both pills open to see if they just made the gelatin walls thinner, which would let them put the same amount of goop into a smaller soft gel. And yes, look, you can see it visually, but let's break out the calipers. Yeah, the mini's shell is 30% thinner. But did they do that to make more space for the ibuprofen goop, or because the thinner walls would dissolve faster so the ibuprofen gets into your system faster? To find out, I raced a mini versus an original, and while that was going, I measured the capacity of the soft gels by cutting one of each open, rinsing out the ibuprofen with some Everclear, drying them, and then filling each half with water from a precise syringe and adding up the volumes. The full-size soft gel can hold 460 microliters, which means the ibuprofen is roughly 2.1 molar. The mini can hold 320 microliters, which means the ibuprofen concentration is about 3 molar. So it's not that they're putting the same amount of goop in a smaller soft gel. They really are increasing the ibuprofen concentration by almost 50%. And that's very strange because both pills have the same active ingredient. So I assumed that Advil came up with some clever way to tweak the inactive ingredients to increase ibuprofen's solubility. Turns out I was totally wrong about that, but it was a journey. Look, the inactive ingredients are the same, except that the mini doesn't have lecithin, but I can't imagine that removing an emulsifier increases solubility. That doesn't make sense to me. At this point, I did what any scientist would do, and I DM'd them. For some reason, they didn't reply, so I kept digging. Maybe they bumped up the molecular weight of their polyethylene glycol from 400 to 600, which according to this paper can dissolve ibuprofen up to 3.3 molar. But then I saw that that requires ethanol, which is not an ingredient. Next hypothesis. This paper shows that the S isomer of ibuprofen is way more soluble than the racemic mixture, which is fascinating, but that would be so expensive. Right? And that's when I realized that the version of ibuprofen in both of these, they're using the potassium salt of ibuprofen. So I looked up the solubility of that. Ibuprofen potassium is so soluble that the only way the authors could get it out of solution was to completely evaporate the water. So Advil didn't need to tweak any of the ingredients. They could just throw in the ibuprofen potassium at pretty much whatever concentration they wanted. And so now the mystery gets even more mysterious. Why didn't Advil just make the minis from the very beginning? I asked them, but they still ignored me. So let's check in on the race. The mini clearly won, but I wonder whether that means it acts faster in your body. That's a different video.